And welcome back to the F1 paddock, where we have now completed 3 days of running here in Barcelona. And with me to discuss it all is Jolyon Palmer and Sam Collins. And I think the big headlines really coming out today was that Mercedes and Red Bull have really shown their hand a bit more. Jolyon, you thought they were kind of playing it cool and staying out of the limelight.
Well, they were, and then today the shackles just came off a little bit. Mercedes topping the times, Lewis Hamilton right at the end of the day, George Russell in the car this morning also looking good, and Red Bull giving it a bit more as well. Max Verstappen, C3 tyre for him early on, just showed a little bit of performance in the Red Bull, and Checo took over the car this afternoon, again did a solid job.
Of course, we don't read into times too much, but Sam, have you spotted anything on the cars of Mercedes and Red Bull that perhaps has given them a little added performance?
Well, added performance, not sure, but in terms of things they've changed, so both of them have been playing around with the cooling systems. Mercedes opened up some louvers on the bodywork, Red Bull did the same yesterday and they were running them all day today. I think the real key here, though, is the temperature we have here is something that's very easy to misjudge, which is what I've done with my clothing today. And actually, it's really quite cold. And what you saw in previous years of Formula One is that the cars can be really sensitive to different temperatures. So when we go to the F1 test at Bahrain, and actually through the season, it's going to be a lot hotter, and I'll be more appropriately dressed, and you'll be sweating when wearing what you are. But so will the cars. The cars will perform completely differently. So I wouldn't read too much into those times yet till we see these cars get nice, hot and toasty.
But they ran the C5 tyre, the softest tyre, both Mercedes, which the Red Bulls and pretty much no one else did. So there's, the pre-testing, testing and everything else. There's all these sandbagging question marks, but they did run through all the tyres.
You've been impressed with Mercedes. They've been doing a comprehensive look at everything, haven't they?
Yeah, they were also the first team and one of the only teams to be doing practice starts since yesterday. Everyone else is just get the car out on track and let's see what it does, but they were doing practice starts. Lewis did a long sort of race run this afternoon as well, just getting a feel for it. I think everyone else has been dialed into what is the new car doing, and they seem to, for better or worse, have maybe a bit more of an eye on the bigger picture right now.
Well, let's check in with reigning world champion Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, it was all right. I mean, of course, there were quite a few red flags. So I think we couldn't complete our whole program, but everything was working well. The car felt good. So yeah, I just continued, from what I did on day one. And I think that was the most important objective here for Barcelona.
It's been an interesting few days. Not been the easiest or most smooth running. We've definitely had some obstacles to overcome, but we've got through as much as of course we'd always want more laps, but I'm happy with today's. I think I almost got 100 laps in today, so for a half day running that's not too bad. A little bit behind on the last 2 days, and the car's a lot different to previous years to drive, as are the tyres. But we're working our way through it.
Great to hear from both Max and Lewis. And I think another theme of today was stoppages and red flags. We've been talking a lot about reliability, and then suddenly day 3 here in Barcelona, cars stopping out on track. Were you surprised about that, Jolyon?
I'm surprised that hasn't happened earlier.
Yeah.
That's the thing, really. New generation of car, you think there's going to be loads of red flags, so much changing, so many cars bouncing around as well. But it's been good until today. And there was a few issues. Alpine, the first one today, 12 laps of Fernando Alonso, starting to look all right, and then engine went pop, and that was him done for the whole day.
Wiped out Ocon's chances as well, really, to get out and have a go.
Yeah, I think the reliability, I'm just going to come back to the Alpine point, because it was starting to look good today for the French team with pink bits on it. And the team, or the pink car with blue bits on it, depending on which race you're looking at, they were really disheartened coming into today. They felt a bit down. They thought today and the rest of the season was going to be a bit of a grind for them. But the engineers had a little bit of a play at the back of the car. They found something. They went, well, that's a bit wild. Let's give it a go. Fernando jumped into the car and apparently went back, got straight on the radio, said, the car's great, I can go quick, I can drive this, it's doing what I want, this is fantastic. And then part of the power unit, and I'm not quite sure which, but there was smoke coming out of the left bank of the V6 engine, which is pretty clearly an engine failure, and that cried enough. But it's a brand new power unit in the back of that Alpine. They haven't really turned it up, and the Alpine team weren't as together as I think they expected to be, but they're really optimistic going into Bahrain. So it's not the end of the world, but that reliability issue, that car's struggled all through the test, and there's a couple of others in that bag as well.
Exactly. I think we've been focusing on Alfa Romeo having a bit of a difficult test, and of course Valtteri Bottas not getting many laps on the board, Joe.
Has he even been here? I mean,
We haven't been able to really talk to him either.
The car's camouflaged, so you wouldn't know. It's invisible. It gets launched on Sunday, so that car doesn't exist. It's an invisible car.
I've been around the track quite a lot over the 3 days. I barely set eyes on the Alfa Romeo. Joe had a decent run in it yesterday afternoon. As I was going around the track today this morning, there was a red flag and Pierre Gasly's Alpha Tauri was in the wall. That was the end of their running today as well. Looked like a driver error, but we didn't see any footage of it, and it's all a bit quiet, and it's a great time to have a driver error, really, isn't it?
Yeah, get it all done now.
Well, earlier on, Pierre Gasly was sitting in one of the press conferences, and I think George Russell hadn't realised there was a red flag, because he was obviously paying attention, and asked Pierre Gasly what the red flag was for, and Pierre just went, "Ask your team." in a little bit of a grumpy way, and then George went, "No, what happened?" "Just a red flag."
Yeah, well, there were several, and we had Sebastian Vettel as well. He was getting his fire extinguisher out.
Yeah, well, it was only just after the Gasly incident got cleared, out on track, and another minute later, and Joe was actually off in the Alfa Romeo again. Another red flag. I think that was number 4 for the day. And as we mentioned, Alfa Romeo barely getting out, and that was Valtteri that took a bit of a price for that. And then just before lunch, Sebastian Vettel had an issue. I think it was engine, wasn't it, Sam?
Well, it was very smoky. And again, there was smoke coming out the back of the green car. Now, that's an interesting one because that's a Mercedes power unit in the back of that car. So if there is a little bit of unreliability creeping in at this point on the Mercedes power unit, that will cause a little bit of concern for Williams, McLaren, and of course the team behind us, Mercedes themselves. But nobody seems to be telling us honestly what's going wrong with these cars.
And that was them done for the day as well. So we actually had, from the morning, having had some really good days, we had Alpine out really early, we had Gasly and the Alpha Tauri team done, Alfa Romeo barely got going after lunch, and Sebastian Vettel with that issue. That was the end of Aston Martin. We only had 6 cars left for the afternoon.
And Haas also
and
not
Haas,
getting
we
much
haven't even
running.
mentioned Haas, yeah.
Exactly. It's been a difficult day.
Haas have had a bit of a shocking test, actually. That car, for me, still stands out as the most developed, most advanced car. I wouldn't say most developed, most advanced car. It's got lots of little sticky-uppy bits all over it. It's lovely. But their garage door was shut quite early in the day. I went down to have a look at it, and the garage door was shut. That no teamers, even the teams that are struggling for reliability, Alpine, Aston Martin, the teams are going home. Garage door's still open. They put the screens in front. Haas, they shut the door, and that was that. They were done. And they've had problems on day 1, problems on day 2, problems on day 3. They need to find some reliability in that car, because if they don't, they're really going to struggle. And I think that car's really not showing its potential yet. But if it does, if they do get it to work, it could be really quick.
Well, now we've covered off the red flags and the stoppages. Of course, in the afternoon, we then had water on the track. It was a wet weather running session. What do we learn from that? What did the drivers get from that, do you think, Joe?
Well, they got a feel for it. There was enough water for 1 lap of Daniel Ricciardo on wets before he came in for the intermediates.
Got the imagery. There we go.
But there was a bit of spray out. The track was significantly wet enough for some proper running on inters, and that was when Lewis took over the Mercedes from George as well. And they would have had a feel for the car. Of course, it's brand new tyres as well for not only the slicks but the wets and the inters. It was wet for properly wet for sort of an hour and a half, 2 hours. They also would have had a chance to feel the crossover, because there's a change obviously to the construction of the tyres this year. They're low profile, but the tyre blankets are also set to a lower maximum temperature, only 70 degrees from what I think it was about 100 last year, and that's all round. Few drivers reporting that the warm-up is a little bit harder, and that sort of crossover from inters to slicks would be a bit harder, so they would have figured that out a bit.
You spoke to Mario Sola, didn't you, today? What was he saying, and what was the general feedback about the new tyres?
Yeah, well, I thought that with that wet weather running, he'd be a bit grumpy, because not many cars did a lot of laps in that artificially wetted session. And he was like, no, we've actually got quite good data. And it sort of dawned on me, actually, quite a few of the teams have been at Silverstone and Misano testing in very wet conditions in storms and stuff. So actually, there's more data that's already gone back to Pirelli on this. But the big thing with the slick tyres is the general feeling is, yeah, these are interesting tyres, but none of the teams really understand the tyres or what you can do with them yet, how long they'll go, when you need to switch. But Mario Sola was saying, and this is really encouraging, that the drivers seem to be reporting that you can push the tyres all the way through the stint. You don't need to preserve the tyres, which makes me wonder, at what point will they know that they need to change the tyres?
Yes.
I've heard different. I think that some teams are struggling still with thermal deg. That was a big push for Pirelli to try and reduce the thermal degradation problem. But from speaking to a few people in the paddock, and also from looking at Lewis and Alex Albon in the Williams did a longer run, they look like they're hanging on okay for a bit, and then there's definitely a drop. In dirty air is when it's particularly bad, and we haven't really seen that. But understanding the tyres is the age-old thing in the Pirelli era, isn't it? It's a bit of a mystery sometimes, and it's a new tyre construction to try and get their head around now.
And talking about dirty air, of course, we've seen some drivers trying to get close and follow. We saw George Russell trying that a few times today. What have you learnt from that? Is it going to be easier to make those overtakes and get close?
I think that's promising. I think all the muttering seem to be good. It's testing, you don't know what people are running. They're obviously not lapping all at a similar pace like they are in a race, which will make it harder. The slipstream is maybe slightly reduced because basically the drag is slightly reduced as well this year. But the mutterings on that are positive.
Well, it's pretty chilly, as you mentioned, Sam. You need a jacket. We'll sort that out later. But of course, when we head to Bahrain for the official test, it's going to be a lot warmer. So what are the engineers going to be doing between now and Bahrain to make sure that the data they've gathered here is relevant for those days testing in Bahrain?
They're going to be really busy. The engineers are going to have to go away, take all the data. It's not just due to the temperature and the weather conditions here. They've come here and they thought, right, this is our F1 car, we know what we're doing, particularly around the floor, we know how to seal the floor, get the most downforce. Then you've got all this porpoising problem, and okay, we now need to go and work that one out, which is solvable, but then do you just raise the ride height and go slow? No, you don't want to do that. So then it's a trade-off on what you want to do, go slow or go quick, or porpoise or not. But then they've also seen everybody else's cars, and a few of them will be going, oh cripes, we've missed out on something, and they're going to be working hard on CFD and in the wind tunnel to try and get an update package ready. Some of them are going to bring big updates to the Bahrain test. They've confirmed that already. Ferrari, on the other hand, have said, no, this is pretty much what we're going to have in the Bahrain test. I'm not sure I believe that, but you know, when an engineer tells you something like they're not going to do, you always take a harder look at what they are doing, because
Well, you spoke to Ross Brawn earlier, and he said he was very impressed with what Ferrari had done. So perhaps they are happy with where they're at. Joe, what about you in terms of drivers? What did they get up to between now and the test? I chased George Russell out of the paddock earlier because I hadn't had a chat with him after him being in the car. Well, no, not really, but well, I am, but not, you know what I mean. And I asked him what he was doing. He said, I've got to get back. I'm going to the simulator. Obviously left Lewis to do all the hard work in the wet, and he was going back to Brackley. Is it simulator work? Is it just sitting down with the engineers, poring over data?
That's hardcore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Before, whilst Lewis was still driving, George was getting out to head back to Brackley. I think there will be simulator time. There's a week off in between, so there would definitely be, for the engineers, a huge amount of data pouring and everything else, competitor analysis. And for the drivers, just having a good think through, talking with there'll be a constant dialogue with the engineers, and if they can, get yourself in the simulator as well, because at this point, every bit of driving, even the virtual driving, is good stuff for them.
Can I ask you a question on this? Because I know you've done a lot of simulator work in your career, and actually George rushing off to get back into the Mercedes simulator is really interesting, because a lot of the teams have their own dedicated simulator driver. I think Jordan King drives Alpine at the moment, amongst a couple of other drivers. And when they get into that simulator, they've been pounding around Barcelona in a virtual world, feeding back on the data. But now I guess the drivers are trying to tell those drivers and the engineers, does it feel like this, or is that the sort of feedback they're going to be doing?
Well, that's correlation work. So you have correlation work to try and make sure what you're doing in the simulator matches up to what you're feeling on the track, and that's where the development drivers and the simulator drivers don't know, because they don't drive the real thing. So there'll definitely be an element of that, particularly with a new car. But for the really advanced simulators like Mercedes have got, there's probably not. Hopefully they're pretty close on that, and they can just dial into setup changes and look into problems that they found.
It's going to be a busy time for George Russell, and I'm sure for so many other drivers up and down the grid. Guys, thank you so much. Sam Collins, Jolyon Palmer. We've had a great few days here in Barcelona, but it all kicks off in Bahrain for the official test in just a couple of weeks' time. Stay with us. We've got lots coming up over 2022. Guys, good night. Goodbye. Adios.